"Mom, don't come this weekend." Those 6 words shattered 40 years of sacrifice. My daughter didn't yell. She didn't argue. She didn't even sound guilty. She simply said, "Ryan thinks it'll be better if the lake house is just for our families this summer." Then she hung up. Not once did she remember one painful truth. It was my house. The spoon slipped from my hand and hit the kitchen floor. The beef stew I'd been making slowly began to burn, but I couldn't move. At 69 years old, I'd survived things most people never imagined. I buried my husband, worked 36 years as a public school teacher, raised 2 children without asking anyone for help. But nothing had prepared me for becoming a stranger inside my own family's life. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I live in a quiet neighborhood outside Asheville, North Carolina. Most evenings are peaceful. A cup of tea, a rocking chair, an old radio playing songs my husband loves at. Until that phone call. That single voicemail made me question every sacrifice I'd ever made. 5 years earlier, my husband Daniel was diagnosed with an aggressive heart condition. The doctors tried everything. Surgeries, medication, hope. But sometimes love isn't enough to keep someone alive. The night before he passed away, he squeezed my hand and smiled. "Ellie, promise me one thing." I leaned closer. "Build that cabin we always dreamed about." For years we'd driven past Cedar Lake every autumn. Daniel always slowed the truck. One day, he'd whisper, "We'll have a porch overlooking the water. Our grandchildren will fish from the dock. You'll make apple pie, while I pretend to fix things I already broke." We laughed every single time. After he died, the silence inside our home became unbearable. So instead of drowning in grief, I built his dream. Every dollar from his life insurance, nearly every cent I'd saved during my career, my retirement fund, everything. Friends told me I was crazy. Keep the money, travel, enjoy retirement. But they didn't understand. That cabin wasn't just wood and stone. It was the last promise I'd ever make to the man I loved. Construction lasted almost a year. Every weekend I drove 2 hours to the property. I picked every floorboard, every window, every light fixture. I planted the maple tree beside the porch because Daniel loved watching leaves change color. Above the fireplace, I hung our wedding photograph. No expensive artwork, just us, young, loving, completely unaware how precious ordinary moments would become. When the cabin was finally finished, I cried for almost an hour, not because I was sad. Because for the first time since Daniel's funeral, I felt close to him again. That first summer was everything I'd imagined. My daughter Melissa arrived with her husband Ryan and their 2 boys. My son Ethan came from Chicago. The grandchildren chased butterflies across the yard. Evenings ended around the fire pit. Stories, laughter. Marshmallows burning because nobody ever paid attention. Ryan grilled steaks. Melissa helped me bake pies. The boys called it Grandma's Magic Cabin. I believed Daniel would have smiled if he'd seen us. I thought, this was exactly why I built it. The changes didn't happen overnight. They arrived quietly, like tiny cracks inside a beautiful window. Ryan started making suggestions. The dock should be bigger. We should replace the old fireplace. Maybe the guest room should become my office. At first, I smiled. People personalize places they love. There was nothing wrong with that. Or so I believed. Then Melissa slowly changed. She stopped asking if I needed help, stopped sitting beside me on the porch every morning. Ryan made every decision. Melissa simply agreed. Sometimes I watched them discussing changes to my cabin, without asking me a single question. It felt strange. But I convinced myself. Families grow. People change. Don't overthink it. Then Thanksgiving arrived. Dinner had barely ended when Melissa asked if we could talk privately. We stepped onto the back porch. She avoided my eyes. "Mom, Ryan and I have been thinking, since we're the ones using the cabin most often, maybe it'd be easier if you transferred it into our names." I honestly thought she was joking. I laughed. She didn't. "It's only paperwork," she continued. "It'll make taxes easier." Taxes? That cabin existed because 2 people spent 43 years saving every spare dollar. Because one man died before enjoying it. Because one widow refused to let his dream disappear. I looked directly into my daughter's eyes. My answer is no. She forced a smile. Okay, just asking. But something about that smile frightened me. It wasn't disappointment, it was calculation. 2 weeks later, a large envelope arrived in my mailbox. The return address belonged to a law office I'd never heard of. Inside, there was a professionally written property transfer agreement. Prepared for my signature, it stated that transferring ownership to Melissa and Ryan would be beneficial for long-term family management. At the bottom, a blank signature line waited patiently, as though everyone already expected me to sign. My hands began to shake. This wasn't a casual family conversation anymore. Someone had hired an attorney. Someone believed my home, my husband's dream, could simply become theirs. I folded the documents carefully, walked into my bedroom, opened the drawer where Daniel's wedding ring still rested, placed the papers beside it, then whispered something I never imagined I'd say. They're trying to erase us. That night, I didn't sleep, because for the first time, I realized I wasn't protecting a cabin anymore. I was about to fight for the last piece of my husband's legacy. The lawyer's letter stayed inside my bedroom drawer for almost 3 weeks. Every morning, I looked at it. Every night, I closed the drawer without signing it. I kept hoping Melissa would call and say, "Mom, I'm sorry." She never did. Instead, she called less and less. Whenever she did, the conversations somehow always circled back to the cabin. Ryan repainted the deck. We replaced the outdoor chairs. The boys invited their friends next month. Not once did she ask if I was coming. It slowly dawned on me. They had already started treating my cabin like it belonged to them. In early spring, I decided to surprise everyone. I baked Ryan's favorite pecan pie, packed homemade strawberry jam for the grandchildren, then drove nearly 2 hours to Cedar Lake. As I pulled into the driveway, something felt different. A brand new SUV sat outside. Flower pots I had never bought decorated the porch. Even the welcome mat had been replaced. I smiled anyway. Maybe the kids wanted to surprise me. I climbed the steps and pressed my key. It wouldn't turn. I frowned. Tried again. Nothing. Again nothing. The lock had been changed. I stood frozen. Maybe Ryan forgot to tell me. Maybe they were replacing it. Maybe I knocked. No answer. I called Melissa. She answered after several rings. "Hey, Mom. My key isn't working." "Oh," she hesitated. "Ryan replaced all the locks last week." "Why?" "The old ones were sticking." "Then where's my new key?" Another pause. "I think Ryan forgot." "Forgot? How do you forget to give the owner of the house a key?" "I'll remind him." "Okay," I whispered. "Drive safely." She hung up. That was it. No apology, no invitation inside, no concern that I was standing outside the home I had built. I remained on that porch for several minutes. Looking through the front window, I could see my husband's photograph above the fireplace. So close, yet unreachable. For the first time in my life, I felt like a visitor in my own memories. I drove home before sunset. Without music, without stopping for dinner. Only silence accompanied me. When I reached home, I walked straight into my study. A large filing cabinet stood against the wall. Inside were every receipt, every blueprint, every mortgage payment, every construction contract, most importantly, the property deed. I unfolded it carefully. Owner Eleanor Grace Brooks, no co-owner, no transfer, no shared ownership. Legally, nothing had changed. Only their attitude had. That realization changed something inside me. I finally understood. They weren't waiting for my permission anymore. They were waiting for me to become too old, too tired, too emotional to fight back. They believed time was on their side. They were wrong. The following morning, I made one phone call. "My name is Eleanor Brooks. I'd like to schedule an appointment." The woman on the other end spoke gently. "I can see you this afternoon." Her name was Victoria Hayes. She had handled Daniel's estate years earlier. After hearing my story, she remained quiet for a long moment. Finally, she looked directly at me. "Eleanor, they have absolutely no legal claim to that property." "So, I'm still protected?" "Completely. They can't take it?" "No, not unless you choose to give it away." A weight lifted from my shoulders. For weeks I'd felt powerless. Now I realized I had never lost my power. I had simply forgotten I still possessed it. Before leaving, Victoria asked one question. "What do you want to do?" I stared out the office window. "I don't know." "Then don't rush. But whatever decision you make it for yourself. Not for guilt. Not for family pressure, for yourself." 2 days later, I called Melissa one last time. I was thinking of spending next weekend at the cabin. There was complete silence then. "This really isn't a good time." "Why?" "Ryan's parents are staying there. They'll be here most of the summer. I'll just use my bedroom." "Mom, it'll make everyone uncomfortable." Uncomfortable. Those words echoed inside my mind long after the call ended. The cabin was uncomfortable. For the woman who built it. I thanked her politely, then ended the call. No tears came, no anger, only clarity, crystal clear clarity. The very next morning, I contacted a local real estate agent. Her name was Susan Carter. She arrived that afternoon. We walked through the cabin together. She admired the lake view, the handmade stone fireplace, the wraparound porch. She smiled. "This place won't stay on the market long." I nodded. "Good." Within a week, several buyers toured the property. Most admired the craftsmanship. One elderly couple stood quietly on the porch, holding hands while watching the sunset. The husband smiled at his wife. "This feels like home." Something inside me softened. I knew Daniel would have wanted people like them to fill the house with love, not entitlement. 3 days later, they made the highest offer. I accepted immediately. The closing date was scheduled just 2 days before Independence Day. Coincidentally, the exact weekend Melissa and Ryan planned their annual family vacation at the cabin. I never warned them. I never argued. I never sought revenge. I simply signed the papers, smiled at the buyers, and handed over the keys as I walked toward my car. My phone buzzed. Melissa was calling. I looked at the screen, then quietly placed the phone back into my purse, because some lessons cannot be taught with words. They must be lived. 3 days after the sale was finalized, my phone rang. "Melissa." For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. "Mom." Her voice trembled. "What happened to the cabin?" I remained silent. She continued speaking, almost breathless. "We just got here. There are strangers unloading furniture. They said they own the place. Please tell me this is some kind of mistake." I closed my eyes. "No, sweetheart. It isn't a mistake. I sold it." Silence, then came a shaky whisper. "You? What?" "I sold my cabin. The one your father and I built. The one you decided I wasn't welcome in anymore." Her breathing became heavier. "You can't do that." "I already did." In the background, I heard Ryan shouting. His voice was angry, demanding. "What is she saying?" Melissa began crying. "Mom, the kids are here. They don't understand." I know. They didn't understand when Grandma stood outside her own front door either. Another long silence. Finally, she whispered, "We never wanted to hurt you." I smiled sadly. "No. You just stopped thinking about me. There's a difference." I ended the call before she could answer. Over the next several days, the phone rang constantly. Ryan called. His parents called. Even relatives I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly remembered my number. Some were angry. Others tried guilt. One uncle even said, "Family should forgive." I answered calmly, "I already have. But forgiveness doesn't mean surrender." Eventually, the calls stopped. For the first time in months, my house felt peaceful again. One evening, my son Ethan arrived unexpectedly. He hugged me before saying a single word. "I heard everything. I'm sorry." "You have nothing to apologize for." I should have noticed what was happening. I smiled. "You were building your own life." He looked around the living room, then at my husband's photograph. "Dad would have been proud." Tears filled my eyes. "I hope so." He reached into his backpack. I brought something. Inside was an old notebook. Daniel's handwriting covered every page. cabin ideas, garden sketches, fishing dock measurements, future family traditions. One sentence had been circled. A home only survives where respect lives. Neither of us spoke for a long time. We didn't have to. The money from the sale remained untouched for weeks. Friends assumed I'd buy another vacation house. Others suggested expensive cruises, luxury cars, new furniture. None of it felt right. Then one Sunday after church, an elderly widow quietly sat beside me. Her name was Margaret. She admitted she hadn't left town in almost 15 years. I keep telling myself maybe next year. But next year never comes. Her words stayed with me. That evening, I made a list, not of places, not of purchases, of people, widows, retired teachers, neighbors living alone, women who had spent decades caring for everyone except themselves. 6 names. 6 remarkable women. I called every one of them. I'd like to invite you somewhere. Where? The ocean. My treat. There was complete silence. Then laughter, then tears. 2 months later, we stood together outside a beautiful beach house overlooking the Atlantic. None of them had expected anything so wonderful. Margaret cried the moment she heard the waves. Helen collected seashells like a little girl. Grace insisted on cooking breakfast every morning. Every evening, we gathered on the porch, shared stories, shared grief, shared hope. No one interrupted, no one judged, nobody asked for anything. For the first time in years, I wasn't needed. I was simply appreciated. And somehow, that felt even better. One afternoon, as the sun disappeared beyond the water, my phone vibrated again. Melissa, this time. I answered. Her voice sounded different, smaller. I've been seeing a counselor. I remained quiet. I finally realized something. I kept choosing peace with Ryan instead of doing what was right. She started crying. I failed you. Those 3 words carried more honesty than every excuse she'd ever made. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know, I'm sorry. Real apologies don't erase pain, but they acknowledge it. I took a slow breath. I believe you, she sobbed quietly. Can we start over? I looked toward the ocean. The waves never stopped moving. Neither does life. We can start talking, but trust takes longer. I understand. And for the first time in many years, she truly did. Months later, Melissa visited my home, alone, no Ryan, no expectation. She noticed Daniel's photograph on the shelf. She stood there quietly. I forgot whose dream that cabin really was. I nodded. So did I for a while. We spent the afternoon baking Daniel's favorite apple pie. We laughed. We cried not because everything was fixed, because healing had finally begun. Sometimes people ask if I regret selling the cabin. My answer never changes. No. Because the cabin wasn't the dream. Love was. Respect was. Family was. A building made of wood can always be replaced, but self-respect, once you give it away, it's much harder to rebuild. The greatest lesson I learned wasn't that people can disappoint you. It was this. Never confuse kindness with permission to be taken for granted. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is close one door, so that a better one finally has room to open the end.